And I'd like to welcome you all to this month's Beyond Black History Month program. A couple of years ago, some of us decided we should be talking about Black history all year long, not just in February, even though it is February that we're doing this. So we hope you will enjoy today's program. I am going to ask all of you to make sure you're muted. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. And towards the end, we will try to present those questions. So I'm going to spotlight Gene, and I'm going to turn it over to him for some introductions. Gene, you're on.
Thank you, Linda. February is February is Black History Month, and our founder, Carter G. Woodson, was instrumental in starting the Black History Week, and soon became the Black History Month, even though it was February. And we decided to do a Beyond Black History Month for Constance Baker Motley. I went to New York City to attend the stamp dedication of Constance Baker Motley. And she was raised, I think, in New Haven, Connecticut. And she had a desire to go into law that she recognized in herself. And she went to Fisk University, then Columbia Law School. And her first practice, she started her practice with the Legal Aid and Defense Fund of the NAACP. And she met our presenter, Charlene Hunter Galt, in her position as an attorney. And we'll talk about that position later on, but she went on to become the Manhattan Borough President. And then she went on to become the New York State Legislature. She was a legislator. And in 1965, President Johnson appointed her to be a federal judge. And as fate would have it, she became the first federal judge that was appointed and served. And as it happened, Linda and I were in Manhattan at the Schomburg Museum, and Justice Constance Baker Motley was there, and she received an award. And we were so pleased to meet her and to talk to her about civil rights and her impact on the civil rights community. And I think the next thing we did was I went to the stamp dedication, and you could see the dignitaries for that stamp dedication. And it was a 45th Black Heritage stamp. There were 46 other people before her. And she was honored by the Commissioner of Parks and Recreation, the official person from the United States Postal Service. Constance Royster was representing the family. Charlie Palmer was the person who painted the stamp. And there was a performance by Andrea Smith McDonald and Sherilyn Eiffel from the Vernon Jordan Endowed Chair in Civil Rights at Howard University gave the remarks. And the Honorable William F. Kuntz was the district court judge from the Eastern District of New York, who he said that Constance was his mentor and mentee. And the last person was the Jillian Lester. She was the dean of the Columbia Law School. And that was me, I think, when I did the taping and the recording, and I took pictures. I think this part turns out to be the place where I introduce Charlene Hunter Galt, who, as we know, was a client of Constance. And I'd like to read her bio. Charlene Hunter Galt is an award-winning journalist with more than 50 years in the industry, extending her word at various times to all media, including the New Yorker, NBC, the New York Times, PBS, NPR, and CNN. She's also written 5 books. The latest is My People, a compilation of her 50 years of reporting on people of color. The book was a nonfiction book and released in 2022. A wonderful showcase of the work of an invaluable 20th century journalist is now out and also in paperback. Hunter Galt is a sought-after public speaker and holds more than 3 honorary degrees. She's married to retired businessman Ronald T. Galt, and she has 2 adult children, Susan, an artist and singer, and Chuma, an actor and director. I think this, do you want to, I'll go through these slides really very fast and we can talk to Charlene. This is the Constance Baker Motley and Donald Howell, her attorney at the start of the desegregation case. Vernon Jordan is also an attorney who represented Charlene. And he was one of the many attorneys who worked for the Legal Aid and Education Defense Fund. There's another picture of Donald Howell and Charlene and Hamilton. This is another picture of Charlene Hunter and Hamilton Holmes. And this is a picture of Charlene and Hamilton and Alfred Tupp Holmes and Vernon Jordan on the campus of the University of Georgia in their attempt to desegregate the University of Georgia. This is Charlene's mother, Mrs. Althea Hunter, and Hamilton Holmes, starting their day in the legal action. And I think this is Charlene today. And she, as I said, she published 5 sets of books. And she did in My People, To the Mountain, My Journey Through Civil Rights, and My People. That's her 3rd book. And I'm going to stop sharing and call on Charlene to join me at this time. And I think we have the requisite people to continue this slideshow. And I think there are a number of questions that I've presented. And I think the first one is, Charlene, when and how did you first meet Constance Baker Motley? And what was your first reaction and impression? And to the extent you want to go back into the case, that'd be fine.
Okay, well, you can interrupt me if I'm going on too long and not telling you what you want to know. But first of all, let me say I'm thrilled to be here to celebrate what I agree should be a year instead of a month. Black History Year we should have. And I appreciate the contributions that Asala is making to our history. And I am just so thrilled to see the stamp beautifully executed of Constance Baker Motley. I can't wait to have my whole bulletin board filled with them if I can make enough money to buy them. But anyway, I'm going to get them and give them to people because I think that that's one of the many, many, many ways that we can preserve our history. Now, you asked me about meeting Constance Baker Motley for the first time. And to be sure, the first time we met was the ensuing days during the trial at the University of Georgia. She was the lead attorney with Donald Hollowell in helping to argue the case that it ultimately ended up as the desegregation of University of Georgia, which was, despite the fact that there are others that get cited, this was in fact the first legal case that resulted in the desegregation of a public institution, University of Georgia. Meredith was many months later, although Constance Baker Motley was also his attorney. But I don't know if she was like this with everybody, every client. I suspect she was, but she was very reserved as it came to me. With Hollowell, you could see her over there, you know, plotting and talking, and um, sometimes ordering Vernon to go somewhere, because Vernon was just out of law school and he was their legal assistant more than anything else. So he was earning his keep. In fact, he finally discovered one of the greatest pieces of evidence that helped in the case. But at any rate, Attorney Motley was always in public focused. Even in private, she was focused, because we were in Athens for the case in 1959, and Athens was segregated. So the only place that we could eat, Black people, was at the Killian House, which was also partly, they had a really wonderful restaurant. And we would go there on breaks in the case. And Attorney Motley was always very focused on eating her lunch and I guess getting out to the next element as part of the case. So we never had much of an exchange, although they did kind of prepare me for being interviewed on the stand. And before I got up there, she was interviewing the Georgia officials who were saying that I wasn't, and Hamilton wasn't being denied admission because of our race. It was because of various other things that had nothing to do with race. And so Attorney Motley, I remember one day I was sitting there, I hadn't been on the stand yet, and she was crucifying the University of Georgia representatives, because they were all lying about why Hamilton and I had been denied admission. And at one point, they put I think it was the dean of admission or one of those officials, and somebody in the back room, I could hear them saying, "Look at him. He's sitting up there, has no idea what is about to hit him." And sure enough, it was not just a curveball from Constance Baker Motley. It was a dead in the ringer ball that just hit him so hard that could have been one of the things that helped win the case, because as you know, in the end, they won the case. But she never, other than saying how she wanted to ask me questions, never had any informal conversations with me, not even at lunchtime, where she talked with Hollowell and Vernon and Horace Ward. But then one day, it was a Friday, and we had been in court the entire week. And I was ready to go back to Wayne State, where I had enrolled until the Georgia case could be decided. And I had pledged a sorority, and two of my girlfriends who pledged with me, we were called the Sorors Three, because we used to sing for all the sorority parties and things. So I was having a good time. And so I was looking forward to getting back to Wayne for the Christmas parties. And all of a sudden, the state said they wanted to continue the case, and they wanted the principals to remain in Athens or Atlanta, either one, so that the case could go on. And I was enormously, if you don't mind me saying it, pissed. And because I wanted to get back to the parties, because I knew once I got to UGA, I probably wasn't going to have any parties to go to. And so I went out of the building where they were having the case heard, got in the car, and they were going to drive us back to Atlanta. And so I was waiting for Attorney Motley, because she was going to ride with us. And so I didn't expect any exchange, because it wasn't a part of the case, right? And she didn't talk to me unless it was a part of the case. So she comes and she gets in the car, and I'm sitting there and I'm in a mood, man, because I want to go to Wayne and have a party, be in the party. So she sits down, and she clearly was in a mood too. And finally, she said to me, she looked over and she said, I know how you feel. And I was shocked. Here was something informal from Attorney Motley. She knows how I feel because I felt really bad. She said, I feel bad too. I said, really? She said, yeah. She said, I wanted to go home. It was Friday and she wanted to go back. We're in Athens, Georgia. She wanted to go back to New York City to be with her husband. And I think Joel Motley, her son, was 9 or something like that at the time. And she said, and I'm not going to be able to go. And that just opened up a whole nother door for me and Constance Baker Motley. She became almost like a big sister to me at that point. Although when she put me on the stand, she wasn't my big sister. She was my lawyer trying to win this case, which she ultimately did. But she was, and then years later, when the case that she won, getting Hamilton Holmes and me admitted to the University of Georgia, prepared me for years later when I'm in New York and I have to go and interview her in one of the positions she's about to take. And it had been a lot of years, but it was just such a wonderful experience to be on that side and have her be, in a way, well, in a big way, responsible for it.
There were a lot of Jim Crow laws around that time, the early 60s. And you were denied access, I think, because they said there wasn't enough room in the dormitories for you. That was one of the reasons they said you were admitted, but you couldn't go. So I think you and Holmes, Hamilton, I mean, were looking to get into the university. And I think your lawsuit desegregated the university, not integrated the university. Can you talk about the difference between what we're talking about what you asked for and what was given to you in the court decision?
Well, I think the thing is that we were admitted because it obviously turns out the university was lying. They said that I had applied too late, but they found a young white girl who had been admitted at the same time I had, and she was from a wealthy family up in Marietta, Georgia. They called her B.B. Dobbs Brumby of the Marietta Brumbies. And so they had that case, and Vernon found a very significant piece of evidence, which I can't remember now what it was, but it was critical. And so, you know, in those early days, neither one of us knew any of the students, and they had made a room for me on the first floor of a dormitory. The girls, all girls had to live in the dorm. The boys didn't. So Hamilton lived with the people whose restaurant we used to eat at during the trial. Anyway, my room had been the Student Government Association, and it was on the first floor, the only dorm room that was there, and all the other girls were upstairs. And that made it so easy when I got there to go into this isolated room and hear on the floor for several nights the girls just beating on the floor. I guess so I wouldn't go to sleep, but that didn't bother me because, as I said in the movie Summer of Soul, I was listening to Nina Simone. But that was supposed to make me uncomfortable, but it didn't. And in time, I guess I gained more friends than Hamp did because the journalism students were a little more open, a lot more open than the other students. But it's interesting that Hamilton never made a single friend the entire time, 2.5 years we were at the University of Georgia. First of all, one of the things that not only was he Black, and that pissed off a lot of these people, but he was also brilliant. So grades were done on the curve. So up until the time that Hamilton, and he was pre-med, so he's up in medical in the biology department, and every test he took, tests were graded on the curve. Every test he took, he would get a 95, 96, 98, 99. And these country white boys from all these little towns in Georgia who used to make 50 and 60 on the test, and that would be the A, that was another reason they hated him. And so when Hamilton graduated, he had never made a single friend. His son confirmed this for me because, you know, he passed, unfortunately, at 54, but he never made a single friend the entire time he was at UGA. He would leave the biology area every day, go home to the Killian household, do his homework real fast, change his clothes, and go play football with the boys in the hood. Because he was the chair, he was the coach, he was the head of the football team at Turner, where we went to high school.
Mhm.
And he wanted to play at UGA, but they told him in those days, either his teammates would try to hurt him or students from football players from the other white schools in the South would try to hurt him. Because as you know, as I said, there were no other schools desegregated at the time. So all the football players would have been white. And so that really hurt him, but he got it over, and then in addition to everything else, and this is how brilliant he was, he graduated Phi Beta Kappa.
Now, you were a journalist major. What was his major? Do you recall?
Well, he was pre-med. That was his whole argument for going to the University of Georgia, that they had a pre-med program unlike any others in the state. When we were asked to go down to Georgia State initially, our high school principal had responded to the wishes of some of the young Black professionals who thought it was time to test the 54 decision outlawing segregation, to test it in Georgia. And so it was a little bit difficult at that time, but let's see, in the end, let's see, how did it go? Hamilton, we both graduated on time, and Hamilton went on to serve in the military and also was the first Black student at Emory Medical School, where he ultimately became head of the whole hospital, the public hospital, Grady Hospital in Atlanta. So I'm not sure I answered your question, but I forgot.
I was saying because of the Jim Crow laws, you were trying to get in and you got in, but they tried to mess around with you. So you talked about him being in the major for pre-med, and you into
Pre-med.
journalism.
Yeah.
How did you use that experience of going to school in a white school versus your school? How did you use that experience to go forward with your degree in journalism?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
I said, how did you use that experience of going from your school that was Black to a white school that was white, but you desegregated? How did you use that experience with your journalism degree to go on into journalism after that experience?
Well, the thing is that, you know, when I went to Wayne State, that was not segregated. And as I said, I pledged a sorority, and I worked in one of the art buildings. And so I had a good experience there. And when they called to say that the judge had ordered us into the University of Georgia after the case was won, I got ready to leave, and my classmates there at Wayne were in tears because they had never been in the South, and all they had ever heard about the South was bad, bad, bad. But anyway, they supported me, and I don't know, I got down there, and as I said, Hamilton unfortunately never made a single friend. In fact, in the early days, I guess I had a little, maybe you call it today, PTSD. I used to have stomach problems, and I'd go to the infirmary, and the only person who would ever come to see how I was doing was Hamilton, and that was fine. But yeah, I just I think that we both had a very different experience, and yet some years later, because Georgia reached out, Hamilton and I were honored with a talk every year called the Holmes Hunter Lecture. And 40 years after Hamilton and I entered UGA, we were doing the Holmes Hunter Lecture. I think that's what it was at the time. And the governor, who had at one point when Hamilton and I applied to UGA, said, no, not one, meaning not one Black student will ever be allowed to go here to this university. And that stayed with Hamilton in his head, I'm sure, all those years, which again contributed to him not wanting to talk to any of these young people who were carrying out, in a way, the wishes. Not one, they were there, we were there, but they was showing him that they didn't want him there. He came, that governor, Vandiver, after 40 years and apologized. It's sort of like George Wallace did with Vernon. But, you know, I mean, it's like Vernon said at one point, he said, we've all been here before, but our journey also teaches us that endurance is not enough. We do not sing, we shall endure. We sing, we shall overcome. And I just think that's so appropriate in all of these situations, because one year when we were having the Holmes Hunter Lecture, this was about 3 years ago, I think, I organized a bus to take students who had participated in the student movement in Atlanta, which I had written about while I was still a student, but to take them, bring them to University of Georgia. And so on the day of the Holmes Hunter Lecture, I'm on the stage and Hamilton's family is there, and over in the audience are about 10, 11, 12, I don't remember now how many, but they were students from the movement. And I wanted the students at University of Georgia, and they also brought in high school students from Athens. I wanted them to see people who had really risked their lives for all of us to get what we deserve as citizens of this country. And so I introduced each one of them, and each one of them stood. Some of them now have transitioned. And I just thought that this was a moment that was so wonderful, that I could show them that they are people who have put their lives on the line to open up this country towards a more perfect union. And the message from the Holmes Hunter Lecture could be seen in those young people, not so young anymore, sitting over there in the auditorium. And that's one of the reasons I say that we need a coalition of the generations. We have a lot of young people now and a lot of discussion about, you know, it's time for a new generation to take over. And I don't have a problem with that. I mean, sometimes I forget well, I'm not going to tell you what I forget, but I forget a lot of things, right? But, you know, we have history that is important for us to share with this younger generation so that they can continue on towards building this more perfect union. And that's part of the reason why, you know, I want to, you know, I want to call for a coalition of the generations so that I can chat with the younger people about our experiences and what we learned, what I learned as a student, and then what I learned in my early days as a journalist, and what I learned today. I just think that we need to be together. And as Vernon said, he said, our journey, he said, Our journey teaches us that endurance is not enough. Listen, he said, we do not sing, we shall endure. We sing, we shall overcome. And I just think that as depressing as we can get these days about some of the things that are going on in this country, we have a history that teaches us. And Constance Baker Motley is one of the people, we dishonor her if we dishonor that history. And we should not dishonor her. And so many people like her. And I'm sure that the Asala people know most of them, if not all of them. But we have a good history that we need to teach our children, because I said all the time, and I continue to say, our history is our armor, and that will protect us in good times and not so good times like now.
Charlene, you talk about going to school back then, leaving Wayne State, which is predominantly Black, and going to the University of Georgia, which is predominantly white. What things did you take advantage of, like in your classes or your extracurricular things, or your with your cohorts down there on journalism? What things do you recall about those ideas?
Well, first of all, let me just tell you, Wayne State University was a city university. It wasn't Black, it was mixed race. It was, I don't even, I suspect, I don't even know, I don't remember actually what the Black percentage was, but it was not a huge percentage, although it was, comfortable.
But it wasn't like UGA, we know that.
Well, that's true. That's true.
Okay.
And so your question was what?
When you leave predominantly, I want to say Blacks, public,
Integrated.
going to the University of Georgia, which is all white except for you in Hamilton. What things did you do with your cohorts, like your other female journalist majors, or what other things did you do to interact, or they interact with you? What was your college life about?
Well, as I said, I had more friends in Hamilton thanks to the kids in the young people, students in the journalism school. And so I spent a lot of time with them. And also there was certain professors. There was one who did a portrait of me. I didn't have anything else to do. And and a lot of the teachers wouldn't interact. They weren't negative, but they wouldn't interact with me. But he wanted to do a portrait. So he did a portrait. I didn't have anything else to do. And I would go every day and sit in his studio. And he did this lovely painting, which for years was in the University of Georgia's journalism college on the wall of the dean. But then they asked for it at the in Washington at the portrait gallery. So it's there. And that was a young white family that I got to be friendly with. Across the street from the dormitory was an English teacher who loved to have me come over and discuss J.D. Salinger. We just both loved J.D. Salinger. And she had another friend in the English department who would often join us. So unlike Hamilton, I did have people who were friendly and reaching out. In fact, there was one night, and this is one of the reasons I have a problem when people do generalizations about whites and Blacks and Jews. I don't like to generalize. And in those days, I knew Black and I knew white. And one day there came a knock on my door. As I said, they had segregated me. They hadn't desegregated the cafeteria. So thank goodness Hamilton lived with a family that had a restaurant. But I had it was 2 rooms. Although I was segregated, I had the best quarters in the whole dormitory because I had a bedroom, which nobody else had. Well, they had a bedroom, but it was everything else. And everybody else had to go and shower in the hall. I had my own bathroom with a tub as well as a shower and a kitchenette. And so at one point, I heard that some of the white students were saying they were being segregated because they didn't have the things that I had. But anyway, one night I'm sitting there, I don't remember what I was doing, and there came a knock on the door. And I opened the door, and there were these young women, several of the girls from upstairs with bags of groceries. And they said, "Hi." And they knew I had a kitchenette. And they said, "We've come to cook dinner for you if you don't mind." And I said, "No, I don't mind." So they came in, and here is one of the most wonderful moments I've ever had anywhere. We sat there eating, and as we were eating, now as I said, I grew up in Georgia. There were blacks and whites. That's all I knew. I didn't know about Jews. Turns out these young girls were Jewish, and they were descendants of people who had suffered in the Holocaust. And they wanted to tell me why they identified with what was going on with me. And of course, again, I grew up in Georgia, so I knew black people and I knew white people. I didn't know Jewish. But that night, I learned a history that I did not know. And one of those girls and I are still in communication. It was just, I mean, and that used to happen for me a lot. Although, as I said, Hamilton was not on the campus, so it never happened with him, and he never made any friends. But you know, it was a time when I was open, and uh, I was on a mission to get my education. I didn't go there to desegregate the University of Georgia. Well, that's what happened, but but I
Well,
went.
how did they select you in Hamilton to be the students to challenge the
They
University of
didn't
Georgia?
they didn't select us. We selected ourselves. These young men who were black professionals in Atlanta had come to our high school to ask our principal. This was 1959. And they said that too much time had passed since the 1954 decision, and Georgia had done nothing. So they wanted to see if they could get a couple of students, good students, so there would be no problem with, with their qualification.
Academics.
Yeah, to go down and apply to Georgia State. So Hamilton was number one in a class of, I don't know, 100, over 100. I was number three, because I was never good at math, and that's why I was 3 instead of 2. But anyway, so they sent for Hamilton and me because I was I was editor of the paper, and I was the queen of the football team, all of that stuff. And so when they proposed this to us, we said, sure. So we go down to Georgia State, and this is fascinating because this tells you the kind of history and the kind of education that we were getting even in our segregated schools. Hamilton and I looked at the curriculum of Georgia State, and I have to give my brother credit. He was the first one to say, no, this isn't good enough. And these black professionals who had brought us down there said, what? He said, no, I'm looking at the curriculum, and it's not going to prepare. He wanted to prepare to be a doctor. I looked at it. There was nothing in journalism. And then Hamilton said, and I give him credit, he pointed north. We walked out onto the front of the office. He pointed north. He said, I want to go there. Now, everybody knew at that moment he was talking about the University of Georgia in Athens, 70 miles away. None of these men knew anybody in Athens. And yet here were 2 black students willing to try to go there. And they said they'd figure it out. And sure enough, they did. They found a couple of black people in Athens who also understood the history and knew how important this was. And so they sheltered us, and so did the Killians until the case was won.
How did Constance Baker Motley and Vernon Jordan and the other learned lawyers become a member of your team to represent you for the desegregation of the University of Georgia?
Well, I think that was through Don Hollowell, who was based there in Atlanta. And he knew all of the men, the professionals, Carl Holman and a couple of other professionals who had initially recruited us. And so I'm sure that that's how he found out about it and got involved. And
So
then
what was your,
Vernon had just gotten out of, excuse me, Vernon was just out of law school and hadn't passed the Georgia bar. But he had gone to Howard and he was really well prepared. But there was some funny stuff going on. And in fact, one of the white officials made some kind of comment once about Vernon's record, that they had done something with it. I don't want to get into that because I don't remember all the specific details. But by the time we were applying to UGA, Vernon didn't have his law license at that time.
trying to think back on Constance Baker Motley and her role as your attorney, how do you think she handled your case in court, and what kind of relationship did you maintain with her as you grew up and she grew up?
Well, I talked about that a little bit earlier, where she, initially, I was an object. I mean, I was the plaintiff. I mean, I was whatever I was. I don't know. You lawyers tell me what I did. I guess I was the
Plaintiff.
was the defendant. I guess we were the plaintiffs. But anyway, initially she didn't have much to say to us. She was focused on trying to catch these white Georgia officials in the lies that they had been telling about why Hamilton and I were not being admitted. And so she was a woman who was totally focused on her job when she was doing her job. Now, when she wasn't doing her job, every now and then she liked a little bourbon, but she was always in control. And, she was tall and stately looking. And, unless you were in the restaurant where she was, enjoying her time with Vernon and Don Hollowell and Howard and those ones, she didn't smile a lot. She was very serious most of the in her professional capacity. But when you would see her socializing, which I had seen before the incident with the two of us in the car, where we both wanted to get back that December for various reasons. But she could be very, very fun, let's say fun. But but she was always conscious of, I guess, of her profile, maybe I could put it that way. And then, of course, thanks to her, I was able to get my journalism degree, and I was able to get a job eventually at the New York Times, and the New Yorker, where I was able to interview her in an official capacity. And that was really nice too. I mean, again, she saw her role as someone who was being interviewed, and I saw mine as someone who was interviewing. And the piece, I think, turned out fine.
What do you think the significance of the 47th Black Heritage Stamp of Constance Baker Motley bringing us together as a country? Can it unify us? Can everybody worship Constance Baker Motley, or can just Black people do it, or can white people do it? How does this stamp bring us together?
I think that's a question that I can't answer. I mean, you got lawyers on this in this program who might be able to give a better answer than I could. But
well, I think the United States Postal Service publishes these Black Heritage Stamps, of which Constance Baker Motley was one, and she's 47th in that series.
Right.
Can the series bring the whites and blacks together or unify us, or is there a purpose of the Black Heritage Stamp?
I'm looking across my office here, and I'm seeing Dorothy Height, and I'm seeing John Lewis, and I'm seeing just a number of Black people who have ended up on stamps. And I think it's one of the elements that can help us educate the public. If there are people who are, I mean, the stamp is so beautiful. I don't know if you have it there and you can hold it up, but it is so stunning. And for people to be, I know that all summer, yeah, there it is, all summer long, I had to go to the post office in Martha's Vineyard and stand in long lines with people. And I kept thinking, I hope they could see the stamps up there, and it'll make a difference in some of these people's lives. And I just think that's what you got to hope for. And you got to hope that a portrait like this will stimulate some interest on the part of people. And by the way, let me just say also, I have a real problem talking about white people and Black people in generalized ways, because white people died for us during the civil rights movement. When I thought about this, when I looked over there at John Lewis's stamp, you know, when John got ready to leave Washington, D.C. to test the 54 decision on the interstate highways, he had everybody write their wills, because that's how dangerous the South was at the time. And when they got to, as it turns out, when they got to, they were all young. I think it was somewhere in South Carolina, was the first place they stopped. And John gets off the bus and attempts to go into the bus station in the front door where all the white patrons go. And a bunch of white boys were on the side, and they said, "Hey, no, boy, you can't go in there. You got to go in the back." And he said, "Why are you going in there?" And John says, "I'm going in here on the basis of the 1954 decision." And he named the whole thing. And that was all they needed. They got on him. They stomped him to the ground and beat the living you know what out of him. But as they were beating him, some of the white boys who were traveling with him jumped off the bus and ran over to rescue him from them. And they got the hell beat out of them too. And that eventually they got away and you know, managed to survive those attacks and head on down the South to participate in what else was going on down there. But I often say that we generalize too much. I don't like it when we just generalize about white people and Black people, especially when we're talking about civil rights and progress and talking about where we want to go in this country. There are white people who died for us: Paola Liuzzo, Goodman, and Schwerner. So I want us all to be, even as when we have this coalition of the generations, and I'm noticing that this younger generation that's moving to take over, they're very well integrated, many of them. And so that continues our history, a history where people, white and Black, have died to help create a more perfect union.
Charlene, when you get
I was
a
going to
chance
say,
to interview Judge Motley, did you spend much time talking about your case and how it helped those after you get admitted?
No, we didn't. We just moved on. I mean, you know, we talked about what she was doing then, which was a very important position that she was in, and went on to even more important ones. And so it wasn't so much about looking back, but standing on the shoulders of our history, which includes giants like Constance Baker Motley and Donald Hollowell and Vernon Jordan.
Linda?
Jean, there's about one more minute. Charlene, if you would like to have some closing comments before we open it up to the rest of the people on the Zoom, this is your chance to give us more words of wisdom. You've given us a lot already.
Oh, no, that's a real sweet thing you just said, but wisdom is not what I would call what I have to say. But no, I mean, I know that we have a lot of challenges, but we've always had a lot of challenges. And thanks to our Black history, so many of us have had the protection of our history as armor. Our history is our armor. And I think that the more we can teach our young people of all colors, classes, and creeds that history and not let it be taken out of our schools, which is, as you know, an effort underway now, but we can't let that happen. And I, as a journalist, I don't generally get into taking positions, but the position that I want to take now is based on my own history and the history that I learned in my Black schools. I mean, my first role model was Brenda Starr from the comic books, comic strips. But I get to the Black school, I read those at my grandmother's knee when I was 5 years old. But when I get to elementary school, all Black, I learn about Ida B. Wells. And then I learn about more of our people who have done things that I might want to do, or many other of our students want to do. And that's the kind of history that cannot be buried and forgotten. I just feel like I have to say that our history is our armor, and we need it. We Black people need it, but we all need it. I mean, I want to just real quick, here's something in my book, My People, that you thankfully mentioned as we were going in. David Brooks, I interviewed him in this, and it's in My People, my book. And David said, I think the first thing we have to do is learn from each other and talk to each other. He said, my rule is the more uncomfortable the conversation is, the more I learn from it. And I'm so hoping the first thing we do is make use of this moment of useful discomfort to face realities in our country and to face each other. And that's the shift in consciousness that needs to take personal transformation and social transformation happen together, but then it has to be institutionalized with action. And I think that those words are so relevant and important today. But Constance Baker Motley has said words too that we need to remember. And I just hope that those who are listening to this program will go and read some of the things that she said and some of the articles that beyond mine that have been written about her, because she is truly an inspiration for all time.
Amen. I'm going to remove your spotlight because there are some people who might want to just unmute themselves, ask you a question in the time we have left. And so this is your chance to raise your hand, because believe it or not, the questions that came in while you were talking, you answered all of them.
Great.
So you did a great job.
Do I get an A? Do I finally get an A?
plus plus. Definitely Dean's List. Anybody have anything they'd like to ask? Bob?
I don't really want to ask anything per se. I just want to say, Charlene, that you were one of my heroes. And also that I that I have the pleasure to play golf with your husband.
Well, you're one of my heroes then. And where were you today? Because he's been here all day asking me to help him with his computer, help him with this, help him with that. And I said, no golf today?
No golf today.
No golf.
Charlene, you've got 30 some odd honorary degrees. Can you tell us in your own words, what's your favorite honorary degree and from what college or university did it come from?
Oh, no, I'm not going to do that. I can't do that.
You can give us your top two.
I have wonderful honorary degrees from so many wonderful institutions, and it's always been a real challenge to go and receive one. In some cases, I actually spoke when I got the honorary degree, but it's one of the things that helps me keep on keeping on. Oh, and by the way, this is breaking news, everybody. I did a piece, and I hope you will go and look it up. It's on the PBS NewsHour website. And it's about this young man who went to New College, and he came out of a Klan family, Ku Klux Klan, and he then became something in the Klan himself. He gets to New College, and somehow the word gets out that he is a Klansman, and he is being treated like you know what. And one night, and this goes back to something I said a few minutes ago, actually, one night he gets invited to a Shabbat dinner on a Friday night. One of the Jewish kids invites him, and he goes. And he didn't get completely, I don't know how much turned around he got that night. But he got invited again. And he would get invited to these Shabbat dinners, and it completely turned him around when he learned that history, which he either didn't know or had been taught in a way that wasn't correct. And so here it was, these Jewish kids teaching him about Jewish history, not all about just the Holocaust, but all of the history. And it completely turned him around. And so I did an interview with him on the NewsHour, and I was talking about him the other day, and it was such a coincidence that yesterday I was talking about him, and today I get an email from him, because when he finally graduated from New College, having been accepted by everybody almost, he then went on to pursue something he had begun to learn at New College, which is about Black history and civil history. And he's gone all the way back, generations and generations and centuries, to write about where we came from and what happened along the way. So he wrote me yesterday, or actually it was this morning, and said, I finished the book. Would you mind taking a look at it? And if you think anything, maybe you'd have a comment about it. It was so, he's just become such a wonderful, not self-absorbed young man. So go look up, his name is Derek Black, and the interview is on the PBS NewsHour. And we did it while he was working on the book, before he finished the book. But now he's finished it, and I have so much on my plate, I declare. But he said, could you take a look and maybe give me a comment? And I just swept everything off well, not everything, but a lot off my plate, so that I could do that, because here's that newer generation. And here we have this connection. And that's one of the things that gives me hope. Finding and relating to young people who are looking for their place And as you know, one of my first books was, maybe it was my first book, it was called In My Place. And it talked about my evolution. And I know his is going to be just amazing. It's not, I don't think it's going to be an autobiography. I think it's going to be more historical. But when you consider his background, this is our hope. This is one of the places where there is hope. And I'm sure that there are other places like this where there is hope. I mean, there are people over here at New College who are fighting the people who want to change that system over there. I mean, New College was one of the most wonderful places I've ever visited as an educational institution. I was invited to give the graduation address, and they told me, now, we got to warn you, the students here are very creative, is one of the words they use. And sure enough, those kids came in walking their dogs, their animals, wearing all kinds of clothing with flowers in their hair. I mean, it was amazing, and I was glad that I was prepared in advance, because it was amazing. But I loved it because the students had just absorbed all of the artistic education they could, and they were just demonstrating it and saying how proud they were of it. Now, is that still going to happen given what they're trying to do now with that institution? I don't know. And honestly, I haven't talked to anybody from over there recently, but I plan to. Um, yeah, so I hope you'll look at that interview, because he's